While you're doing that, let me do one thing.
Okay, when you're ready, doctor.
Give me one more second. Because it's actually not it's a, what is this called? I think it's called a corta.
That looks like Flame About.
Yeah, it does. But class is like, we're like eating robotic clothes too. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Sidi Ishaq. We ready?
Yes, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق الناس والحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وأزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وذرياته وأهل البيت كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم إني أسألك من كل خير سألك منه محمد نبيك صلى الله عليه وسلم وأعوذ بك من كل شر استعاذك منه محمد نبيك صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم اغفر لنا ما قدمنا وما أخرنا وما أسررنا وما أعلنا وما أنت أعلم بما منا ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من فتنة المحيا والممات ومن فتنة القبر ومن فتنة المسيح الدجال ومن عذاب النار واسم المصير اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد رضي الله عن أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حول ولا قوة إلا بالله رحمة الشيخ احضرنا بهذا المحضر وابدأ فيه من نظرة تأتينا بظهر أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Brother Habib or Ustad Habib al-Rasul. I am one of Shaykh Ameen's students, as you all know. Today, Shaykh Ameen is busy. Shaykh Ameen had some urgent things he had to attend to, so he asked me to fill in the class. And this is Muhammad. He insisted on being a part of the class today, but Muhammad knows he has to be quiet if he's going to stay in the class, right? Okay.
Alaikum Muhammad.
They're saying Assalamu alaikum Muhammad. You can't hear them, but they say Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, Alaikum Muhammad. MashaAllah. Wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So today I'm going to be covering for Shaykh Ameen. Please keep Shaykh Ameen and his family in your du'as as always. This is one of the rights of the teacher on the student, that we keep them in our dua. That's a pin, son. Now you're gonna have to go be with mom if you're gonna keep talking. So today we're gonna continue with the subject. Well, before we start with the fiqh for today, Shaykh Ameen asked me to deliver a very important message to you all, which is to say thank you, and I'm congratulating you, because anytime you do something that earns the pleasure of your teacher, this is a cause for congratulations. But alhamdulillah, Shaykh Ameen was pleased with our efforts to raise money for feeding the homeless. He said, alhamdulillah, we had enough. And I don't know if Sidi Ishaq may want to add on to that as well, because I know him and Shaykh Ameen spoke. But he said, alhamdulillah, the funds that we raised were enough to be able to go and serve the people. And I talked to Sidi Ajib Abdul Salam, the president of Nasr Ilm America, who is putting together these classes and who is working with Shaykh Ameen on the project of feeding the homeless. And he mentioned that, one of the stops in particular had so many people. And, Ajib said he was actually surprised that there was that many people, so alhamdulillah, there wasn't no shortage of people. We say, we say alhamdulillah that we're able to serve them. We're never happy to see people suffering and in need, but we know as Muslims, when we see that, our obligation is to help them, right? And one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows or causes these kind of things to be Yes, you can. Causes these things to be a place in the world, people who are in need of help, people who need assistance, is for us to do our work to help them. So alhamdulillah, I'm thanking you on behalf of Shaykh Ameen and congratulating you, letting you know that Shaykh Ameen is very pleased and wanted to extend his thanks. And inshallah, when the next feeding the homeless run happens, we're gonna let you know again. So that'll be another opportunity for us to get benefit to support that work. Sidi Ishaq, did you want to add anything to that? Did I miss anything that Shaykh Ameen wanted us to tell the people?
No, I think you covered it, Imam.
Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And also, I want to let you know that this class is being brought to you by Nasr Ilm America, which is a philanthropic organization inspired by the work of Sheikh Hassan Sisi. Shaykh Ameen is one of our esteemed teachers, and we're honored to have the opportunity to use our platform to create a platform to for us to be able to come and benefit from him in the privacy of our own homes during this pandemic. Alhamdulillah. So today's lesson, we're going to talk about the signs of prayer. We're going to continue the signs of prayer. Yes, Mohammed?
Someone can just back.
Yeah. Sure. But now, Muhammad, you can't talk anymore. If you talk again, I'm going to send you outside, okay? Okay. Alhamdulillah. So we're going to continue with the signs of the prayer. And I believe last week, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe last week we ended, by talking about the optional time of Asr. Is that correct? Am I correct with that? I don't know if Ustad Abdullah is here or if somebody else took some good notes. That can let us know. I know Brother Frank stayed with some good notes. So he may be able to let me know if I'm correct. Inshallah.
Yeah, I think that's where you were at, Habib Rasul. I think it was about the shadow. The shadow is as tall as you, and that's just.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you, Hajj Dawood. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam. I'm Tayyib, alhamdulillah. How are you and your family?
Alhamdulillah. We're good. Alhamdulillah. It's good to hear your voice. Alhamdulillah. So, continuing from that, and I'll give a brief recap because, at this point, the fiqh becomes like math. So if you miss something, it can make it difficult for you to follow what's going on after it. So we're talking about the different times of prayer. And the most important sort of beginning point you need to know is that we divide the prayer first into two parts. We divide the time of the prayer first into two parts. There's the adda time and the qada time. The adda time and the qada time. The adda time is the acceptable time of prayer, right? Or the good time for prayer, or the due time for prayer. And the qada time is the overdue time for prayer, meaning when the person prays late, when they're making their prayer up, right? And if a person misses the appropriate time of prayer, they still have to make that prayer. And they should make that prayer quickly as possible. They shouldn't postpone it anymore because in actuality, it becomes more of a debt upon them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the more time passes. So you have the adda time and the qada time, and then you can break the adda time down further into two parts. So the adda time, the acceptable time, the appropriate time, the due time, which is the adda time, has two parts. The first part of that is called the choice time of prayer. The choice time of prayer, or the ikhtiyari is the Arabic, but the Arabic, we don't want it to, it's not so important that you know the terminology as that you know the time for the prayer. So the choice time of prayer is the time where it's the best time for you to make the prayer. It's the beginning of the other time. It's also the time where you have the choice. If you are in the middle of something, or you're a little tired, or you're a little hungry, or you're watching an Islamic lecture or anything like that, if you choose to, you have the right to postpone your prayer a little bit, right? To postpone your prayer, right? To not pray right away until you get to the second part of the other time, which is the obligatory time for prayer, the obligatory time. Once you get to the obligatory time, you need to pray right away. You don't have any, at that point, you don't have the right to postpone your prayer unless you have some valid excuse, and the valid excuses are only a few. They're things like being asleep when that time for prayer comes in, or if you were so hungry that you couldn't focus on the prayer, you would have the right to take just a few bites of food, enough, as they say in the books, to straighten your back, so that now you can focus enough on the prayer. Or if you were incapacitated, right, if you weren't in your right mind or something like that, these are the things that you could use as a valid excuse to extend your prayer beyond the daruri time or obligatory time of prayer, right? So other than that, once you reach the obligatory time of prayer, you have to pray right away. So we've been going over the course of the last couple of classes, we've been going over more specifically the actual times of the prayer. So we talked about the time of the Dhuhr prayer, we talked about the time of the Asr prayer, and I believe we talked about the time of the Asr prayer as being the time when we mentioned the optional time. I may be covering a little bit of a review, but I'd rather review something than skip something. Muhammad, you gotta let me teach class, man. I can do that for you after class.
Oh.
I told you could stay in here because you said you were gonna be quiet. MashaAllah. So the optional time of Asr prayer begins when the optional time of Dhuhr ends. However, to say, I'm gonna read this a little bit quickly because I think we went over it, but we'll have time for questions and answers. And if anybody gets confused or needs me to slow down or repeat anything, just stop me and we'll do that, inshallah. So the optional time of Asr prayer begins when the optional time of Dhuhr prayer ends. However, to say that one's prayer's optional time begins when another prayer's optional time ends is not precise. The precise thing to say is that they share with each other the time in which 4 rak'ah can be performed. Excuse me. This is very interesting, very important. So we say, generally speaking, the lesson starts by saying sort of generally that the optional time of Asr prayer begins when the optional time of Dhuhr's prayer ends. And we talked about what those times are. The optional time for Dhuhr prayer, the optional time, the choice time, or which is the beginning of the Adha time, right, begins when the sun begins to decline from its highest point, right? The sun rises in the east, gets to its highest point. That's what we call noon. Not noon like 12 o'clock, but what they call true noon, which is when the sun is at its highest point. This is just before Dhuhr comes in. Then when the sun begins to decline toward the west, that is when Dhuhr comes in. Just a moment after the sun begins to move away from the highest point, right, from the middle of the sky. As soon as the sun begins to move, that's when Dhuhr prayer comes in. And at that point, you'll cast a shadow to the opposite side of the sun. So basically toward the east, you'll have a shadow. When that shadow gets to be twice the size of the thing that's casting the shadow, that's when Asr's time comes in. We covered that. That's just a quick review. So, optional time of Dhuhr, right? Someone said, is that the meridian point? I believe so. I think that is what they call the meridian point, if I'm not mistaken. If that's wrong, somebody can correct us, but I think that's what they call the meridian point, inshallah. So then when the shadow becomes twice as long as the thing, this is when the optional time for Asr starts. So we say here that the optional time for Asr begins when the optional time for Dhuhr ends, because the obligatory time for Dhuhr starts as soon as the optional time for Asr starts. So understand this well. The obligatory time for Dhuhr begins when the optional time for Asr begins. I'm going to say it again. The obligatory time for Dhuhr begins when the optional time for Asr begins. So when Asr comes in, the moment Asr comes in, if you have not prayed your Dhuhr, that's when you're in the obligatory time and you need to go ahead and pray your Dhuhr, right? You need to go ahead and pray your Dhuhr. To delay your Dhuhr into the Asr time with no reason is a sin, right? Is a sin. The way the books say, they say you'll be punished for it. But when they say you'll be punished, they mean with Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, right? It's not anything that carries a hudud, legal punishment from the Islamic law, but it's something that you should avoid because it's considered a sin because you're postponing the prayer beyond where you have the right to postpone the prayer. Again, unless you have one of the valid excuses that we talked about, and we'll talk about that more in the later class, inshallah. But so this is what we mean when we say that the optional time of Asr begins when the optional time of Dhuhr ends. However, Now we getting precise. However, to say that one's prayer that one prayer's optional time begins when another prayer's optional time ends is not precise. So they gave you that general idea, but now they're going to give you some precision. The precise thing to say is that they share with each other. I'm sorry. The precise thing to say is that they share with each other the time in which 4 rak'ah can be prayed. So there's an overlap. There's an overlap of the time that it takes 4 rak'ah to be prayed, right? On this point, there are 2 or 3 sayings in the madhab. 2 or 3 sayings in the madhab. Some of the people say, when they say people here, they're talking about the scholars with the Maliki madhab. So here we're seeing that there's difference of opinion, right? Diversity of opinion, even within one madhab, even just within the Maliki madhab. So some of the scholars of the madhab say that Asr shares with Dhuhr in the last of the optional time of Dhuhr. So this would mean, the people who say this, what they mean is that the time it takes to make 4 rak'ah before Asr comes in, you can make Asr. That's what they're saying. That you look at the time that Asr comes in, really you can make Asr, you can make Asr just before that time. About 4 minutes. They estimate it takes about a minute to make a rak'ah if you're doing short surahs, right? So they're saying about 4 minutes, but the books don't really say minutes in this case. They say the time it takes 4 rak'ah before Asr comes in, you can begin to make Asr. That's one opinion. That Asr comes in about 4 minutes before the clocks say Asr comes in, is one way you could put it, right? But really what they mean is that you can make Asr 4 rak'ah worth of time before Asr comes in. So the last part of Dhuhr's optional time is actually the time you can begin to make Asr. I hope that's clear. I said it a bunch of times, hopefully for it to be clear. This means that if you pray Asr in the optional time of Dhuhr, just before it finishes, and you take from the end of Dhuhr a time equal to making Asr, Asr will be accepted and valid. So if you made Asr 4 minutes before Asr, quote unquote, comes in, you would be accepted. It would be accepted or acceptable. This is regardless of the fact that Asr was done in the optional time of Dhuhr. If you say Dhuhr is in this time, you are still saying, if you say Dhuhr in this time, you are still saying Dhuhr in its proper time. So again, they're saying there's an overlap. About 4 minutes before Asr comes in, it's the optional time for Dhuhr and the optional time for Asr. So if you made Dhuhr in the last part of its optional time, you'd be correct. If you made Dhuhr earlier and made Asr in the last part of Dhuhr's optional time, you'd be correct according to this opinion. If you say Asr in this time, you are saying Asr in its proper time also. Asr and Dhuhr share with each other the time it takes to make 4 rak'ah before the end of the optional time of Dhuhr. I'm going to read that last statement because it sums it up. This is the first opinion. If you say Asr and Dhuhr share with each other the time it takes to make 4 rak'ah before the end of the optional time of Dhuhr. The second saying of the madhab, so this is the second opinion, is that Dhuhr shares with Asr, meaning that if you pray Dhuhr after the end of the optional time of Dhuhr and in the beginning of the optional time of Asr, Dhuhr is valid. Say that again. The second saying of the madhab is that Dhuhr shares with Asr, meaning that if you pray Dhuhr after the end of the optional time of Dhuhr and in the beginning of the optional time of Asr, Dhuhr will be valid. Do this over here, son. I don't want everybody to hear the boxes clapping. Thank you. So this is saying that Dhuhr and Asr share the time it takes 4 rak'ah after Asr comes in. So according to this opinion, if you made Dhuhr just after Asr came in, the Dhuhr will be valid. Can you go with mine? Yes, you can go with mine. You can open the door for you. No, you can take that with you if you want. Excuse me, Jamal. I hope the walking is not disorienting you. Tell me that I took you to go shishi, okay? Tell me I already took you to go shishi, okay? Let me close the door. صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم أسبق ناصر الأقلق الهادي إلى صراط المستقيم. So according to that second opinion, can you all see me? Okay, there we go.
No, we can see you. We can see you.
Okay, shukran. So according to that second opinion, you could pray Dhuhr just after the optional time of Asr begins, and your Dhuhr prayer would be in a good state, right? You'd be praying in a good time. So according to that opinion, the optional time for Dhuhr extends 4 rakat worth of time, roughly 4 minutes, 4 rakat worth of time beyond when the optional time of Asr comes in. The third saying is that there's no sharing between Dhuhr and Asr. The time of Dhuhr finishes at the end of the fathom, or when the shadow equals its caster, right? So again, we talked about that. So basically that the time of Dhuhr ends right at that moment when the shadow is, I think I said before, it's twice, but it's equal to its caster, right? And if you do Dhuhr after this time, you're doing Dhuhr in its obligatory time. So the third saying is that Dhuhr and Asr's time are distinct, and that once the optional time of Asr begins, the optional time of Dhuhr ends, and you're now in the obligatory time for Dhuhr. So these are the three opinions in the madhab. So which opinion should you follow? Well, alhamdulillah, you have the right to follow any of those three opinions. But the advice Shaykh Ameen gave us is that whichever of those opinions you follow, you should stick with it. So you shouldn't say, oh, today I'm going to pray Dhuhr a little bit just after Asr comes in, and then tomorrow I'm going to pray Asr a little bit before Asr comes in, and then in another time you treat them as distinct. No, you have to pick one of those opinions and stick with it, right? But they're all good. They're all good. So if you choose to say, I'm going to make Asr, I'm going to give myself the ability to start making Asr just before Asr comes in, this is okay. Or you can say, I'm going to start making my Dhuhr just after Asr comes in, this is okay. But whichever one of those opinions you take, you should stick with that opinion and make that your habit. So I think we have time to finish up this page. Bismillah. The optional time of Asr ends at the Istarah, right? It ends at the Istarah. This is they translate this as the yellowness of the sun, and its obligatory time begins. So the optional time of Asr extends all the way up until this moment, and you'll see it if you pay attention to it. There's a moment they call it Istarah. Sometimes they call it the glow. There's a moment in the latter part of Asr's time before Maghrib comes in. Sometimes maybe it's a half an hour before Maghrib. Sometimes maybe it's 20 minutes. It depends on the time of year and where you are. But before Maghrib comes in, you'll see this moment where everything, on a sunny day, everything kind of has a golden glow to it, right? The sun is getting ready to set, and it gets to this position where everything has like this yellow, this glow that just, it just radiates this golden glow from the sun. This is the time when you know you've reached the obligatory time of Asr, meaning if you haven't made Asr yet, you go make it right away. So that's the beginning of the obligatory time for Asr and the end of the optional time for Asr. The obligatory time for Asr ends at sunset. After sunset, its overdue time begins. What's its overdue time called? Somebody want to answer me? What's the overdue time called?
Qadr.
Qada. Naam. Thank you. And this time, the qada, or the overdue time, ends on the day of judgment. So you owe the prayer. If you're late, you owe the prayer until the day of judgment. And it's not like you can say, oh, I missed the prayer 5 years ago, so inshallah Allah has forgiven me for that because so much time has passed. No, that prayer stays with you to the day of judgment, and the weight of it continues to increase until the day of judgment. Now, if a person had, we talked in the past, like if a person had like, a year's worth of prayers to make or something like that, Allah gives us ways, Allah through what he's guided the scholars to has given us ways to make those prayers up where we don't have to make them all up at one time, because it's very difficult to make them all up at one time. So if you missed a year or 2 years worth of prayers, you had a period of time when you were praying, you can make them up over time. You may take 5 years to make them up. That's okay. Just you make them up little by little, but you make sure you don't fall behind by missing any more of the prayers that are due now. Right? And we've talked about that, so I don't want to rehash the old lesson, but if people have questions about it, we certainly can go back to the old lesson because this is very important. But the big thing that, well, I'll go ahead and say it. One of the rulings that we've studied in previous classes is that if you owe a prayer, you make that prayer before you make the next prayer. So if Maghrib comes in and you haven't made Dhuhr or Asr, you make your Dhuhr or Asr first before you make Maghrib. And that's the way you operate unless you've missed a large number of prayers. And a large number of prayers is about a day's worth of prayers. So if you missed 5 prayers, excuse me. If you miss 5 prayers or 6 prayers, then you have the right to pray the prayer that's in and then go back and pray the prayers that you missed so that you don't end up owing so many prayers. But other than that, you should make the prayer that you missed before you make the prayer that's in. Someone asked, can I repeat the ruling of Asr's time? I think what you mean is the ruling of when Asr's time comes in. So Asr's time comes in at the point, like we said, the optional time of Asr begins at the end of the optional time of Dhuhr, when the shadow of the thing becomes the length of the thing that casts the shadow, and it extends until the point where you have the istara, the glow, the yellow, the golden glow that permeates everything, or that, that maybe permeates isn't the right word, but this golden glow is cast on everything from the sun. And it's you should look for it. You should look for it when you get to be, roughly maybe a half an hour or so before Maghrib. You should start to look for it, and see, when you see that glow. Sometimes I'll be driving, on the highway with my wife, and I'll see that it'll get to be a point where you'll see that glow bouncing off everything. When you're outside, sometimes you can see it real good. And I say to my wife, see, that's the glow. That's the glow. So we know if we hadn't made Asr, we'd have to make Asr right now, right? So alhamdulillah. I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't, let me know. Can I mention the first opinion? So the first opinion is that the optional time for Asr begins about 4 rakats worth of time before Dhuhr goes out. That's the first opinion. So if you were to make Asr just before the optional time of Dhuhr ends, you'd be making Asr in its proper time, right? So let's say Asr comes in at 5 o'clock. This is just for an example to help you understand the point, right? It's better not to really judge the times of prayer based on the clock or based on the signs. But just for the sake of helping you understand the point, I'm going to use a time. Let's say Asr comes in at 5 o'clock. So according to the first opinion, if you were to pray at 4:56, you were to make Asr, your Asr would be valid because it technically comes in about 4 rakats worth of time before the optional time of Dhuhr ends. That's the first opinion. Second opinion is that the optional time of Dhuhr extends into the optional time of Asr. So if at 5 o'clock Asr came in, if you made Dhuhr right at that time, right at that time, not later, but right at that time, your Dhuhr would still have been said in its proper time, right? That's the second opinion. And the third opinion is that they don't share a time. Is that when the optional time of Dhuhr ends, the optional time of Asr begins, and there's no overlap between the two. And all 3 opinions are valid. So you have the right to pick whichever one, but you have to stick with that opinion. And the fact that you know these opinions should let you know not to get upset with somebody who follows one of the other opinions, because they're all valid. The optional time of Maghrib begins at sunset, as soon as the sun's disk disappears on the horizon. It ends when the obligatory time of Maghrib begins. The optional time of Maghrib is the necessary time it takes to call the adhan immediately after sunset, meaning immediately when the sun's disk disappears, because this is when Maghrib comes in, to break the fast, and to make ablution or wash if it is required. The obligatory time of Maghrib ends when there's time enough for purification and making one rak'ah before the beginning of Fajr. So I'm going to say all that again. The optional time of Maghrib begins at sunset, as soon as the sun's disk disappears on the horizon. As soon as the sun disappears from the sky, is when Maghrib comes in. You'll notice the sky is still pretty light at that time, but the sun has disappeared. That's when Maghrib comes in. The optional time of Maghrib ends when the obligatory time of Maghrib comes in. When is the obligatory time of Maghrib comes in? Well, the optional time of Maghrib is the necessary time it takes to call the adhan when the prayer first comes in, to break the fast, and to make ablution if it is required. So all the time you got is the time to make the adhan, the time to break the fast, and the time to make wudu. The time it takes you to do those three things, that's the obligatory time, the optional time of Maghrib. And once the time it takes you to do those things is out, that's when you're in the obligatory time of Maghrib. And if you hadn't prayed, you have to pray right away. So in other words, the optional time for Maghrib is short. You don't really have the time to delay. When Dhuhr first comes in, let's say Dhuhr first comes in and you're in the middle of something, you can finish what you're doing. It may take you half an hour, it may even take you an hour. And when you finish, you can pray Dhuhr and still have prayed Dhuhr well in its optional time before the obligatory time comes in. Same with Asr. Asr comes in, you may be in the middle of something. You can finish what you're doing. It may take you an hour. And when you finish it, you can make Asr. And depending on the time of year, you'll probably still be comfortably, in the optional time before the obligatory time of Asr comes in. But the time of Maghrib is not like that. You don't have a lot of time, according to the method we follow. You don't have a lot of time to, do other things after Maghrib comes in. You have to pray pretty much right away. Now, how long is the optional time of Maghrib? We said it's the time it takes you to call the adhan, break your fast, and make wudu. How long is that? There's no hard and fast rule of the time. Shaykh Ameen, I'll share this with you, that Shaykh Ameen will say it takes about 3 minutes. It takes about 3 minutes, to mashallah. So Shaykh Ameen would say it takes about 3 minutes. You got about 3 minutes to make the Maghrib before you exit from the optional time and you're in the obligatory time. Now me, I'm kind of slow. So the time it takes me to call the adhan, make wudu, and break my fast is a little bit longer, but not much longer. Maybe it's 5 minutes or 6 minutes or something like that. But if you find people that are praying Maghrib 15 minutes after the Maghrib comes in, this is not correct. This is they're praying it in the obligatory time, right? Now, I'm not telling you to go and start policing what the other masajid do. If they'll listen to you, you can tell them, y'all are making Maghrib too late. You need to make it earlier. But if they're not going to listen to you, then the better thing to do is to find a different masjid to pray in, or go pray somewhere else, in a different masjid with a different jama'ah or something like that, so that you can know that you're getting your Maghrib in a good time. Someone asked, does the optional time to make Maghrib include the time to make the salah as well? No. The optional time, well it does, but when we describe it this way, we're saying you have no. And I like the way you asked that question. It was very precise. The optional time for Maghrib, the way we're talking about it, does not include the time to make salah. Because if you had to call the adhan, made wudu, broke your fast, right? Those are the moments of time where you would have had the right to postpone your prayer, right? But once the time it takes to do those things ends, you're in the obligatory time for Maghrib, which doesn't mean that you're not making your Maghrib in a good state, as long as you don't delay it any longer than that. So if you pray your prayer as soon as you hit the obligatory time of the prayer, alhamdulillah, your prayer is in good shape. It's better if you pray it in the earlier time for the other prayers, but you're still in a good shape if you pray it right at the obligatory time, especially with regard to Maghrib. Because Maghrib, you may need the time that it takes to do those things. Because maybe you have to call the adhan, and you have to break your fast, and you have to make wudu. So you haven't done anything sinful by postponing your prayer into that time. So, and generally speaking, whenever you pray your prayer right at the obligatory time, you're in a good state. Even more so for Maghrib, because Maghrib, the optional time is very short. You follow what I'm saying? So no, when we talk about the optional time, it does not include the time it takes to make salat. It includes the time it takes to do all of those things in preparation for the salat. And as soon as the time for those things passes, you're in the obligatory time and you need to go ahead and make salat right away. Good question. Now, this is the part that this is also important. The optional time of Maghrib, or we talked about that. The obligatory time of Maghrib ends when there is time enough for purification and making one rak'ah before the Fajr. What does this mean? So just as the obligatory time for Dhuhr extends all through the obligatory time of Asr, the obligatory time for Maghrib extends all through the time of Isha, all through the time of the night until just before Salatul Subh, or the prayer people call Salatul Fajr, comes in. So you're in the obligatory time throughout that whole period. So it would be sinful, for instance, to delay your Maghrib until 3 o'clock in the morning. But your Maghrib would not be in the overdue time unless you made it after Subh comes in, after Fajr comes in. So the obligatory time for Maghrib and Isha extends all the way up until the time for Subh comes in, the time for Fajr comes in. Now, this will make more sense, I think, inshallah, after I read the point about the Salatul Isha. Bismillah. The optional time of Isha begins after the red twilight disappears and ends after the first 1/3 of the night. So the optional time for Isha begins after the red twilight of the night disappears. This is how you know the time for Isha has come in. And there's a few different ways you can tell. The main way that they mention here is when the red twilight disappears. This is you see it when Maghrib comes in, there's still some light in the sky, and that light remains in the sky, particularly not even just in the west where the sun set, but even in the east, you still see light. And then after a while, you'll start to see that light becomes red, and then you'll start to see that red twilight starts to pass away, right? That red twilight starts to pass away. So where there's like no light in the east, and in the west, even if it's not pitch black, you don't see that red tinge anymore. That's when you know the time for Salatul Isha has come in, right? Another way that they say is when you start to see stars in the sky. That's how you know Isha has come in, right? And, some of the scholars, they give different times, but the best way is to go by the signs. And if you use the clock or the calendar, you can go and look at the sky around the time that the clock and the calendar says that Isha comes in, right? Or even you can start around the time an hour after Maghrib comes in. You can start to look and see, what are the signs telling me? Is it looking like what we're describing in these lessons? Has the red twilight passed? Am I seeing stars? That's when you know that Isha has come in. And the reason I say an hour after Maghrib is because some of the times on the clock sometimes say they have Isha coming in a little bit later than it does, which is okay because you're still making Isha in a good time, right? But if you want to be more technical and learn how to go by the signs, even just before the time when the clock says Isha comes in, you can go outside and start to look and see some of these signs. And we want to familiarize ourselves with these signs. And I say we because I need to do it too. I've done it and then kind of done it a long time, haven't done it, get kind of lazy and start to rely on the phone and stuff. But we want to put ourselves in tune with the natural signs as much as possible, so that even if something happens where the phone doesn't work or doesn't give us the right information, we still are able to make our prayer in a good time. So the optional time of Isha begins after the red twilight disappears and ends after the first 1/3 of the night. So when does the night begin? The night begins, with regard to this lesson, the night begins when Maghrib comes in, when the sun sets. And the night ends at dawn, when Subh comes in, when Fajr comes in. So if you take that whole space of time and divide it into 3 parts, when the first 1/3 of the night passes, that's when the optional time of Isha has passed. Right? When the first third of the night ends, that's when the optional time of Isha has passed. Excuse me. So let's just say, for the sake of giving you an example so that you can wrap your mind around it, let's say there's 9 hours between when Maghrib comes in and Fajr comes in. I don't know if it ever would be 9 hours. I'm just pulling that number out of thin air for convenience sake. If, let's say that Maghrib came in at 6 o'clock, and let's say that Fajr came in, Subh came in at, I guess that would be 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Let's just say, for the sake of an example, right? Then that would mean that if you break that up into threes, that's 9 hours. So that would be 3 hours would be a third. So that would mean that at 9 o'clock, the optional time of Isha would be over, and you'd be in the obligatory time for Isha, right? You would be in the obligatory time for Isha. That's just an example, right? To help you see the principle. So, Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. According to Islam, the night begins at sunset and ends at dawn. When you know the time of sunset and dawn, you can add up the total time in between and divide by 3. You add 1/3 to the time of Maghrib, and this will give you the end of Isha's optional time and the beginning of its obligatory time. Its obligatory time ends at dawn. After then, its overdue time begins, right? So, as a final point with regard to this issue of the optional time and obligatory time of Maghrib and Isha, once you get to the point where you have enough time for 5 rak'ah, right? 5 rak'ah. I'm sorry, not 5 rak'ah, 4 rak'ah. 4 rak'ah before Subh comes in, before Fajr comes in, right? Once you get to the time when there's enough time for 4 rak'ah, then you reach the point where this is the end of the optional time of Maghrib, right? Why? Because at that point, if you had time to make 3 rak'ah Maghrib and 1 rak'ah Isha before Salatul Subh comes in, before dawn, then you can consider that you got those prayers in before the overdue time came in, right? Before the overdue time came in. I'm saying it a little differently than how I said it a minute ago, reading the lesson, because this is how I remember getting it from Shaykh Ameen, right? So I want to talk to you straight the way I got it from Shaykh Ameen. And if it seems like there's any, conflict, then, we can talk to Shaykh Ameen and get clarification. But from what we got on the actual end time lesson, he taught us that, from what I remember, that when there's enough time for 4 rak'ah before the dawn comes in, that's the end of the obligatory time for Maghrib. Why? Because at that point, you could make 3 rak'ah for Maghrib and 1 rak'ah for Isha and have gotten all of those prayers, at least 1 rak'ah of Isha in before dawn comes in. Once you pass that time, you will be praying your Isha in the late time, right? You'll be praying your Isha in the late time. And this is going to come up again when we talk about how you determine what prayers you owe if you had some kind of excuse, like the woman who was on her menses and then her menses left her and she had to calculate how much time she has before dawn comes in to know what prayer she owes, right? And we'll talk about that issue. And for the sisters listening, we're not saying that you have to get up early in the morning to figure out, then that's not what you should do, actually. But the way the Fiqh teaches us the information, it gives us this precision, because what happens if you do wake up in the middle of the night and you happen to realize that, oh, your menses have left you, right? Then you have to start to figure out, okay, I need to go make ghusl. And after I make ghusl, how much time am I going to have to pray? Will I owe my Maghrib and my Isha, or just my Isha, like this? So this lesson will come back up when we talk about that. But for now, the point that I want you to get is that the obligatory time for Maghrib and Isha ends when dawn comes in. So if a person isn't able to get their Maghrib and at least 1 rak'ah of their Isha in before Subh, before Fajr, then they will be praying late, right? But as long as they're able to get those 4 rak'ah, 3 for Maghrib, 1 for Isha in before Fajr comes in, before dawn, that they can consider they prayed their Maghrib and the Isha within the Adha time, right? Within the obligatory part of the Adha time. And it will be punished, or it will be considered sinful that they waited so long to make their Maghrib and their Isha unless they had a valid excuse, but they can say that they got their prayer in before it was in the overdue time. And I hope that makes sense. Last point we're going to cover for the day, Bismillah, is the optional time for subh. The optional time for subh prayer begins at dawn. Dawn is when the light begins and you can see the darkness leaving, and you can tell that daylight is about to come. Another example is when you see the daylight attacks the night and the night doesn't want to move. The optional time of subh, and so this is all just ways they're describing the way that you can tell when the time for Salatul Subh comes in. This is, again, you should go out early in the morning, look at your clock when it's saying that Subh is about to come in, that Fajr is about to come in, and start to look at the signs, when you can. It's hard if you live in the city, and I'm not telling you need to do this every day or every night, because once you get a sense of the signs, that's enough. And once you get confirmation that the phone or the clock that you're using is correct, then you can use that, as a tool to help you. But you want to at least get in tune with the natural signs, inshallah ta'ala. So once you see there's a point where it's still dark in the sky, but you start to see the first signs of dawn on the way. And this is when they talk about seeing the white thread of dawn, right? The white thread of dawn, right? When the white thread becomes distinct from the black thread. This is what they're talking about. When the white thread, meaning these white threads of light, become apparent in the sky, this is when the white thread becomes distinct from the black thread. This is when dawn is upon us. This is when Fajr or Salatul Subh first comes in. So this is when the optional time of subh comes in. Another example is when the daylight attacks the night and the night doesn't want to move, right? So this is again, they're saying, like, you start to see the first threads of light, but the darkness of night is not yet leaving, right? Someone asked, is that a little time before the sun rises and is seen in the horizon? Yes. But it depends on what you mean by little. There's usually a fair amount of time before dawn comes in, or after dawn comes in, before the sun rises, right? But we'll talk about that in a second. The optional time of subh ends when the people can see each other's faces without the aid of artificial light, or when they do not see stars in the sky. This is about 30 minutes before sunrise. At this time, the obligatory time begins and lasts until sunrise. After this, it is the overdue time. Right? It is the overdue time. So just to explain this in my own words, Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammad. When Salatul Subh comes in, we talked about when Salatul Subh comes in, the optional time for Subh, right? Subh is the prayer that people often call Fajr. In the Maliki method, the Maliki books, they often call it Salatul Subh. But they're both acceptable names. We're going to talk in 1 second about one of the reasons why we use the term Salatul Subh in the Maliki method. But in any case, the Salatul Subh, Salatul Fajr, when that time comes in, that optional time, it lasts until there's enough light in the sky to where you can look down the street and see the face, when you can see a person's face without the aid of natural light. So if there were no street lights, if it was just, without the aid of artificial light. So if there were no street lights, there was no artificial light, there's a point where the sun has not yet risen. It's still kind of dark, but you can look and you start to see there's now enough light in the sky that you can see, oh, that's Brother Amir walking down the street. Oh, that's Hajj Dawood. Oh, that's a man. That's a woman. That person's wearing a red shirt. That person's wearing a green shirt. Once it's not dark, when there's enough light that without any street lights, you can tell all those things, that's when you know that you're in the obligatory time for Salatul Subh. And if you've been postponing it, you can't postpone it anymore. You got to go ahead and pray, right? And they say that is, in the book, it says that's about a half an hour before sunrise. Of course, that varies depending on where you live and what time of year it is, but that's like a nice estimate that they're giving you to kind of begin to look for those signs. And that's when you enter the obligatory time for Salatul Subh, right? So the optional time for Salatul Subh may be a half an hour, maybe an hour. It all depends on where you are, but it's shorter than the optional time for Dhuhr and Asr and Isha, right? Generally speaking. So for Salatul Subh and Salatul Maghrib, you don't have a lot of time to dilly-dally or to delay the prayer. You should pray more or less as soon as it comes in. You have some time for Salatul Subh, like we said. You do have some time before the obligatory time starts. And the way you tell the obligatory time starts, we talked about it, was enough light in the sky that you can see that's a man, that's a woman, that person's wearing a red shirt, that person's wearing a green shirt. Or like it said in the written lesson today, you can see the faces of the people without artificial light. Also, when you see the stars have passed, you can't see stars in the sky anymore, right? This is when you know you're in the obligatory time for Salatul Subh. And if you haven't prayed yet, you should pray. And final note on this, Fajr, when in the Maliki method, when we refer to Fajr, we're often talking about the Sunnah, right? The Sunnah, the 2 rak'ah Sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ made before he made the Fard Salat, which we call Salatul Subh. So there's nothing wrong with calling it Salatul Fajr, but if you're studying the Maliki method, you need to get familiar with using the terminology that we use in our madhab. We generally call the Fard prayer that you make in the morning at dawn Salatul Subh, and we call the Sunnah prayer Raghibatul Fajr. Sometimes people call it Raghiba, right? Raghiba. Sometimes you hear people in the Maliki method in particular call it Raghibatul Fajr, right? So those 2 rak'ah Sunnah, we call Raghiba or Raghibatul Fajr. That's the 2 rak'ah that you make before you make the Subh. Says if Fajr is a Sunnah Raghiba, that means that it is less than Sunnah, but more than Mustahab. So Raghiba is a term, it's an interesting term that they use in the Fiqh, that it means that it's not as strong as a Sunnah Muwakkida, like some of the Sunnah prayers that the Prophet ﷺ used to always make, but it's bigger than some of the Sunnah Ghair Muwakkida or the Mustahab Sunnah Rak'ah that the Prophet ﷺ used to make. So it's not on the level of Salat of Shaf and Witr. It's not quite on the level of Shaf and Witr that you make before you go to bed, right? Those 2 rak'ahs you make after Isha before you go to bed. But it's bigger than some of the sunnahs that the Prophet ﷺ would make that he didn't make Sunnah Muwakkada, right? And we're gonna end there, inshallah ta'ala, and we're gonna open up the floor for not many, maybe just 10 minutes or so of questions, inshallah, before we end it for the day. I do see one thing somebody posted in the chat. Somebody said, what did Shaykh Ameen say about Salatul Maghrib? So what Shaykh Ameen said about Salatul Maghrib is that the optional time for Salatul Maghrib is very short. So you should try to make the Salatul Maghrib very quickly after it comes in. You have enough time, like we discussed today, to call the adhan, break your fast, and make wudu. That's the length of the optional time of Salatul Maghrib. After that, you're in the obligatory time, and you should pray right away if you have not prayed. Shaykh Ameen says that that's about 3 minutes, right? So you don't have a lot of time. That's his estimate, 3 minutes. Some people may say it's a little bit more, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, but it's not long. It's not long. So if you see people that are praying Maghrib 15 minutes after it comes in, that's not the proper way. It's not the right habit. So alhamdulillah, I hope that answers that question. And we're now opening the floor for any questions anybody has. You can type them in the chat. You can click the raise hand button on Zoom, or you can even take your phone off mute and just ask the question, inshallah. So bismillah. Do we have any questions?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How you coming to the Amir?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, so so hold on real quick. Sorry about that. Somebody's kid crying
No problem.
upstairs. One second.
No problem. Well, while you tending to the baby, we got a question on the chat. Somebody said, is the obligatory time for soup when the sun starts to rise or when it is fully risen? The obligatory time for soup is neither of those. Before the sun starts to rise. The obligatory time for soup is when there's enough light in the sky that you can look with no artificial light, with only natural light. You can look down the street, and if you saw somebody walking down the street, you could tell if it was a man or a woman, or you could see their face, or they were in a red shirt or white shirt or black shirt, white shirt. And this is well before the sun starts to rise. Have you ever gone somewhere, like if you've gone to a rural place, either a rural place in America, like in the South or the Midwest, or somewhere in another country where they don't have a lot of street lights, you'll see that when it's nighttime, it's like pitch black. And then you'll start to see in the morning time, well before the sun rises, maybe 30 minutes before the sun even begins to rise, you'll start to see the sky is lit up enough that you can kind of see, you can see without any artificial light, even though there's only natural light and the sun isn't out, you can see enough that you can tell who's walking down the street. That's when the obligatory time for Salat al-Subh begins. And it ends as soon as the sun starts to rise, meaning as soon as you see the first part of the sun disk. Once you see the sun disk is when sun rises and you should have prayed. Once the sun disk, has fully risen, then you're praying in the overdue time. And let me know if that doesn't answer your question, and I can give more. Alhamdulillah, you said when is it over? Yep. So the sun, okay. Alhamdulillah. Now I understand your question. So the obligatory time for Subh ends when the sun begins to rise. When you first see the first glimmer of the sun disk is when you should have prayed by then. If you didn't pray, hurry up and pray, because you don't want to delay the prayer anymore. But you want to try to have you want to have your prayer made before you see the first part of the disk even rise, right? Because you don't want to be in a position where if you want to avoid praying while the sun is rising, if you can. Why do I say if you can? Because I don't want you to think that, because there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the sun rises and sets between the horns of Shaitan. So we don't pray when the sun is rising or setting. But you will pray while the sun is rising or setting if you're praying a prayer that is late. You follow what I'm saying? So if you haven't made the Salat al-Subh yet and the sun has started rising, you have to pray. You can't delay it. You don't wait until the sun has fully arisen. I know some people maybe have that idea from information, not quite correct information they've heard in the past, right? If you in a situation where you haven't prayed your Subh and the sun is starting to rise, you still pray your Subh, right? You still pray your Subh. You don't delay it any longer. But you don't plan to do that. You plan to have prayed your prayer before the sun starts to rise. Because when the sun starts to rise is when you're leaving the obligatory time and you're now in the overdue time. I'm glad I looked the second time, because I better understood the question when I saw the note that you put there. Sidi Amir, you back? Brother Amir, you back?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically when you mentioned at the beginning of the class about the actual times, or the time of prayer, was divided into two parts, which is the qadr time and the adr time, right? And then you mentioned the qadr time, which is the overdue time, and then the adr time, which is the optional time, the choice time, and the obligatory time. That's correct.
That's correct, but let me try to simplify it a little bit.
Okay.
So the adr time has two parts.
It's two parts.
The adr time has two parts. The adr time has two parts. The first part is the choice time. The first part is the choice time. The choice time is also called the optional time, but it's not a different time. You call it the choice time or the optional time. So let's not call it the choice time. Let's call it the optional time. So the adr time has two parts. The first part is the optional time. The second part is the obligatory time.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and those two parts together make up the adr time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to ask. Yeah. And is there, this is, of course, this is, there's like previous like classes online that Shaykh Ameen gave about this that I could look at, correct? Okay.
I believe so. Because we So from this session, excuse me, I'm not listening because prior to this, Shaykh Ameen did have classes online, like there's videos of his classes online, but I don't think he went through the entire book
In depth,
online. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, what he covered in depth, but I don't think he went through he got through the entire book. There's like certain lessons that are online. I don't know what I know.
Yeah.
For instance, the 14 Fards of Salat is online.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know. I can't say for certain whether or not the times of prayer was one of the ones that's online or not. But in this round, you know, this round of classes that we've been doing since the pandemic started, he has covered some times of prayer. He's covered it. This is, I guess, my second time covering part of it, and Ustad Abdullah covered part of it last week. So it's between that is there. Shaykh Ameen, knowing him, he will probably go back over some of what I've done, because you know he's the Shaykh. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna make sure that you get it. You know, so I would say just keep coming in the next few weeks, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah, because I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you good.
No, because I was saying, like I've been attending, since when Sheikh Ameen was teaching in the masjid, 96th Street, and I remember him giving these lessons. Yeah,
right,
man.
Now you've heard these lessons before, Amir.
Yeah.
Listening to these lessons with Shaykh Ameen.
Right.
So I know you've heard them before.
I've heard them
before. Yeah.
But to like really grasp and like really try to like really get a sense and understand it, it's a different.
You gotta hear it multiple times.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why I'm gonna just to say briefly, because I want people to ask their questions if they have questions. Okay. But this is why it's important to stick around for a while.
Right.
Because just the nature of life is that you may miss a class here or there, or you may not fully understand it the first time. Sometimes you may not understand it the second time. But if you stick around long enough, the way I studied with Shaykh Ameen, it wasn't like we went through the book one time every single day and I got it, in this one, month or something like that. It was years of visiting Shaykh Ameen, hearing the same subject matter 2 and 3 times, hearing him explain it one way to one person, another way to another person, seeing his adab, his etiquette with the people, how he explains something to a new Muslim, how he explains something to a new student, how he explains something to a student who's been around for a while,
Yeah.
And after a while, you grasp it. So even one time, Shaykh Ameen, not to cut you off, but even one time, Shaykh Ameen said to me, he said sometimes he has students that, and this is not aimed at anybody. I have no idea who he's talking about. I have no idea what he's talking about. So don't nobody take this as me talking about you, because I'm not. Shaykh Ameen says sometimes he got students, they'll study with him, and then he may give them ijazah or something, and then they'll go off, and or something may happen in life. They may have to go and may get married or something like that, and then they'll stop coming around for a while, and then they'll come. When they come back, it's like they think that whatever they got from Shaykh Ameen was everything, was it. And Shaykh Ameen said one time he told one of his students, he said, well, in the time since you've been with me, have you continued learning? Have you learned anything more? And the student maybe said yes. Shaykh Ameen said, well, I'm still learning too. So if you're able to stay connected to the Shaykh, even if you move away, you get married, things happen, just stay connected as best as you can, and continue to grow, continue to benefit.
Right. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, because I remember this is the last thing. Because I remember, Sheikh Amin always mentioned, it's just you just have to be consistent, and the thing in the class that you teach, we have to practice it in order for us to get a better sense of knowing exactly what it is that to really grasp that understanding is to practice it. So but I apologize to everybody else if anybody else had any questions to keep, I didn't mean to keep you guys waiting. So apologize for that. Shukran, jazakallah khairan, Sheikh.
Right, yeah. I'm not the Shaykh. I'm not the
Doctor,
Shaykh.
doctor.
Alhamdulillah.
Dr. Habib, yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. But
Shukran.
no apology necessary. This was a good talk for the people to hear. Alhamdulillah.
Right. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Other questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. City is hot.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
So
salam wa barakatuh.
so if you make one raka, if you're able to make one raka of a given salat in the obligatory time, is it still considered on time?
Yes. Great question. If you're able to make one rak'ah within the obligatory time of the prayer, it is considered on time. Alhamdulillah, it is considered on time. But again, as we said, that shouldn't be your habit. Maghrib is different. To make one rak'ah of Maghrib. Well, no. I'm sorry. I'm about to confuse myself and confuse you. So let me back up. Long as you make one rak'ah of the prayer within its obligatory time, you can consider that you prayed the prayer in time before it's overdue time. But you don't want to make it a habit of waiting until the end of the obligatory time to make your prayer. That's why the book say you'll be punished for that. It's a sin because you don't want to be in the habit, for instance, of making Maghrib and Isha just before Fajr comes in. But as long as you can make one rak'ah of the prayer within its obligatory time, you can consider that you prayed it within the acceptable time, and it's not late. It's not a makeup prayer. Does that make sense?
Yes, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah, yeah. Alhamdulillah, good question. Other questions? Other questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
Oh, wait. Somebody else asked a question in the chat.
They said the time. Alhamdulillah. They said the time between subh and dhuhr is the only time that there is no prayer in. So there is actually a prayer between subh and dhuhr. It's not a fard prayer. But after the sun rises, after you pray Salatul Subh, you don't pray any more prayers before the sun rises. So if you pray Salatul Subh in its early time, you don't pray any more rak'ah until the sun rises. After the sun rises, you wait a few minutes and you can pray sunnah prayers, nawafil prayers, nafila. And some of those nawafil have a name. They say, they talk about Salatul Ishraq, which is the sunrise nafil, right? They also talk about in the sunnah Salatul Duha, which is duha is the time after the sun has risen and it's like nice and bright, And really the two prayers are the same. They just, when you make it, shortly after the sun rises, they call it Salatul Ishraq. When you make it later, a little bit closer to Dhuhr, they call it Salatul Duha. But and you can pray both times if you want. But this is the time for nafila. There's no fard. These are not fard prayers, but you can make nafil after the sun rises before Dhuhr comes in. And again, please let me know with the questions in the chat. You got to let me know if you need further clarification or if I don't answer your question. Alhamdulillah. Brother Hassan, you got your hand up.
Assalamu alaikum.
Beloved.
Alhamdulillah. My question has to, I just want clarification on Salatul Subh. All right.
Mm-hmm.
In the event that one wakes up and the sun is not, the sun hasn't risen yet, but it's nearly to rise. So we can still just go ahead and make salat. Because it's been an area of contention. I heard you say earlier that people have said certain things about what the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that this is the time to say time.
Right, it's a very common misconception. People, because of this hadith where the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us we do not pray while the sun rises and sets between the horns of Shaitan. that lets us know we shouldn't pray at those times, right? So some people have taken that to mean, I don't know if any scholars have said this, but some of the people, it's a common misconception, very, very common. You know, anybody who hasn't studied in a formal way, you can see how they would come with this understanding. Even some of the people that I guess they like the Salafi people, you know, because if you're not studying with a teacher, the books just say don't pray when the sun rises and sets, right? So some people think that if you haven't prayed your Salatul Subh and you're running late, that you should wait until the sun rises. But this actually is not correct. Anytime you have a prayer that you owe, you want to pray that prayer as soon as possible. So if you wake up and Salatul Subh is about to go out, and you go make your wudu, and by the time you stand in front of your prayer rug, the sun has started to rise, you should still go ahead and pray. You want to still go ahead and pray right away. You don't want to delay your prayer any longer. We don't know how long we're going to live. Allah could take somebody's life, you know what I mean, in that moment. So you don't want to die owing the prayer. You want to hurry up and pray it. But you don't want to pray any nawafil, any nafila, any sunnah prayers while the sun is rising and setting. We're forbidden to pray any sunnah prayers, any nawafil, while the sun is rising and setting. And if you pray your fard while the sun is rising, you should feel bad, right? You should feel bad because you're praying late, you know, and you should take that as motivation to make sure that the next day you get up and you pray that prayer so that it's finished and prayed and you salamed out before the sun begins to rise, because you don't want to be resembling a person who is praying their sunnah at the forbidden time. But but if you find yourself in that position, you shouldn't delay it any longer. You should go ahead and pray. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question. Now, I have a follow-up question, if it's all right.
Sure.
For the Nawafil prayers, for instance, the Nawafil prayer that you make at the Fajr time, those are the Sunnah. Do you get an opportunity after? Do you have to make those up? I've heard that Nawafil is Nawafil. You don't have to make them up, but you get reward for doing them. And and I want to ask the same question, you know, for the Nawafil prayer of Witr.
Shaf and Witr. Yeah.
Yes.
Very right. Nawafil is Nawafil prayer. It's not the fard prayer. But you can make up your Salatul Shaf and Witr, and you can make up the 2 rakats that you make before Salatul Subh, before the fard prayer in the morning. You can make them after the sun rises. You can make them but you gotta wait till after the sunrise, because what we just said, you do not make Nawafil prayer while the sun is rising or setting, because we're forbidden to pray at those times.
No.
Exception being, that's old, but go ahead and make the Asr while the sun is setting. You haven't prayed Subh or Fajr while the sun is rising, you got to go ahead and make it while the sun is rising, right? But those are the only exceptions, right? The exception is a prayer that a fard prayer that you owe. Now, the Shaf and Witr prayer is valid to make up until the time you make Salatul Subh. So let's say, for instance, you go to sleep, you wake up, Fajr just came in, but you're still in the optional time, and you got plenty of time before the obligatory time. If you want to make your Shaf and Witr, then you can, right? But let's say you don't got a lot of time, you're in the there's still light. Now you see the sun hasn't started rising, but there's enough light in the sky to where you can look down the street and see that's a man walking down the street, that's a woman walking down the street. You know that you're in the obligatory time, so you need to hurry up and pray, right? In that situation, you should go ahead and make your Salatul Subh prayer, right? And then after the sun rises, you can make up your Shaf and Witr prayer, or you can make up your Salatul Raghiba, the 2 rakat before Salatul Subh, or you can both. And for some people, they have made the Shaf and Witr and even the Salatul Raghiba, some people have made that like a weird, like something that they have committed themselves to doing all the time. And those people should definitely make those prayers rises. So it's not mandatory because it's not a fard, but you get reward if you make it up. And if you've made it something that you have committed yourself to doing, you've made a kind of like a promise to Allah, so to speak, that you're going to make these particular nafil prayers every day. Then if you miss them, alhamdulillah, you get up, you make your salatul subh, you make the fard, because that's the fard. And then after the sun rises, you go ahead and make those nawafil prayers that you committed yourself to doing. But what you don't want to do is make them, you know, in the obligatory time of subh to where you put yourself in danger of making your salatul subh late, right? You don't want to put yourself in a situation where I should say we don't want to make our, this is a struggle for me too. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we might make the fard prayer late because of the sunnah prayers. That's like doing the ibadah like backwards. So once you see you don't have, but you only have a little bit of time to make your salatul subh and have it be on time, alhamdulillah, Allah gave you the ability to get the subh in before it became late. So focus on that, and then after the sun comes up, you can make your shafin witr if you didn't make that, and you can make your salatul raghib, the 2 rakat sunnah that you make before salatul subh. Is that clear?
Very clear. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, no problem, alhamdulillah. Other questions? I think we got time for maybe one more question, inshallah. Any other questions? Questions or comments, corrections? Because we have some people here that are students of Shaykh Ameen too, that can correct me if I'm wrong. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, so the you mentioned about the Asr time when the sun has like a radiant glow. Is that that would be considered it's going into the obligatory time of Salat, correct?
Yes, that's when the
Okay.
obligatory time of Asr begins. Yes.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Okay. So and the obligatory time, that's way different than like going into like the overdue time. So if you pray in the obligatory time, which we shouldn't make it a habit of, but certain circumstances, you know, we do go into the obligatory time. That's not, you know, the prayer is still in a good state. The prayer is still in a good state
Yes.
when you're praying in the
Yes.
obligatory time.
It's. I mean, so it's a little bit.
Daddy, send me. Send us
Okay.
send me tissue.
Okay, Muhammad, I'm almost done with class, okay? Just be a little bit patient, okay? Allahumma salli wa sallam ala alhamdulillah. So the obligatory time is distinct from the overdue time.
Right. Okay.
Right? The obligatory time is distinct from the overdue time. Now, if we're talking about Dhuhr and Asr, if you pray Dhuhr, you know, within the obligatory, like if you pray, let me put it this way. You can think about the obligatory time as the time when you have no more grace period, right?
Got it.
If you got a bill that's due, let's say the bill is due on the 2nd. Let's say the bill is due on the 5th, right? Like they say rent, right? Your rent comes due on the 1st. But if you pay it on the 2nd, your landlord is normally cool. If you pay it on the 3rd, your landlord is normally cool. They say that landlord generally is supposed to give you till about the 5th, right? So if you pay it on the 5th, the landlord will be cool. But if you pay it on the 6th, it's late, and the landlord might have a problem with you, right?
Right.
So it's good if you pay it on the 1st. Landlord gonna be happy if you give him his money or her money on the 1st. You pay it on the 2nd, they're okay with that. 3rd, they're okay with that. All the way to the 5th, they're okay with that. But the 6th is late. And now they may tell you, hey, you got to stop being late on the rent, you know?
Right,
So
exactly. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So I use that analogy to say you don't want to extend your prayers deep into the obligatory time.
That's right.
If you pray your prayer as soon as the obligatory time comes in, you're good. But if you start extending your prayer well into the obligatory time, that's when it becomes problematic. So if a person prays Dhuhr as soon as the obligatory time comes in, alhamdulillah, no big of a deal. But if they pray it at the end of the obligatory time, unless they have some circumstance that kind of makes them have to do that, like because of their work or something like that,
Yeah.
then they're in a bad situation. And the Prophet says in this hadith that talk about the fact that it's a lot of Islam, that it's problematic to consistently pray, you know, your Dhuhr and your Asr together deep into the obligatory time. Or there's hadith that have been interpreted that way. Similarly, if you pray Maghrib as soon as its obligatory time comes in, that's fine. If you pray Asr as soon as the obligatory time comes in, that's fine. But if you delay it until just before Maghrib comes in, then you know that's now you cutting it close, right? If you pray Maghrib as soon as the obligatory time comes in, then alhamdulillah, because you haven't postponed it within the obligatory time. You just postponed it until the obligatory time. But if Maghrib comes in, its obligatory time comes in, and you don't pray, and you extend it well into the obligatory time, the further you extend it into the obligatory time, the more it's a sin. Because one way you can think about it is, you have the right to postpone the prayer in the optional time. Once the obligatory time comes in, you don't have the right to postpone the prayer anymore. So if you postpone it for a minute, that's a sin. If you postpone it for 2 minutes, that's a sin. If you postpone it for, 3 hours, then the sin is compounded by those 3 hours.
Right.
So I don't want to tell you it's fine to pray within the obligatory time, because let's say you pray Maghrib 3 o'clock in the morning. Technically, you're praying within the obligatory time, but you postponed it a very long time, which is bad. But I also don't want to tell you that that's the same as praying late, because it's not. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. So one way to look at it is, let's say a person is struggling to make their 5 prayers. Then their goal should be to make their 5 prayers, right? To make sure every day they're making their 5. If they're late, okay, they're late, but make them. Let's say a person's making their 5 prayers. Alhamdulillah. Now make them on time, make them at least in time, at least in the obligatory time, right?
Right.
And let's say you've gotten that under your belt. You're praying your prayers and you're praying them in the obligatory time. Okay, alhamdulillah, now let's try to get to where you're making all of them either just when the obligatory time comes in, or if possible, even in the optional time, so you can get the maximum reward for the prayer. You follow what I'm saying?
Right.
And if you're already doing that, you praying your prayers on time in the optional time, right? Then you can start to look at, okay, maybe I can pray some sunnah, some nawafil, 2 rak'ah before Dhuhr, 2 rak'ah after Dhuhr, like that.
Okay, alhamdulillah, shukran, jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah.
Any other questions? Brother Frank, did you have a question? I know sometimes you raise your hand, but I didn't see a video for a minute.
I'm a little embarrassed. The subject's getting way past me. My intake valve is closing up quick. So could I just ask a general question then? What's the obligatory time for all 5 of the prayers, starting with Fajr?
That's a great question. Obligatory time for Fajr starts when there's enough light in the sky that you could see who's walking down the street without any artificial light. So if there were no street lights, you could tell if it was a man or a woman, if they were wearing a red shirt or a gray shirt, if they were, if it was me, you could see, oh, that's Habib walking down the street. And the book mentions that sometimes is about a half an hour before sunrise, right? As a general gauge, maybe about a half an hour before sunrise, give or take, right? The obligatory time for Dhuhr starts when Asr comes in. When Asr comes in, that's when the obligatory time for Dhuhr begins. The obligatory time for Maghrib starts just a few minutes after Maghrib comes in. So after you've had enough time to call the adhan, break your fast, make wudu. That's when the obligatory time. Yes. I'm talking too fast.
I'm sorry. The obligatory time for Zohr is when Asr begins.
Yes.
And what's the obligatory time for Asr?
The obligatory time for Asr, yes, I forgot about that. The obligatory time for Asr is when there's a yellowish golden glow that the sun casts on everything. They call it istarah.
Okay.
And then the obligatory times, I'm sorry.
Is there anything else that I could use as an obligatory time for Asr other than the sun's glow?
Not really.
No.
Not really. But when you when you see the glow, you'll know that that's about when the glow comes in. So I've heard people estimate that sometimes it's maybe 20 minutes before Maghrib comes in, 20, 30 minutes. You got to be careful with the times because it depends on where you are geographically and what time of year it is. But if you start looking around 30, 20 minutes before Maghrib, just look to see how the sun reflects on things a little bit differently.
Okay. You know, the problem is living in the city, I don't have access to see that sort of, to see the sun up and down and so forth. I'm just basically going by my my app on my phone that wakes me up.
Yeah. And I do that too. That's good. You know, that's good. But one way to think about it is, okay, for Salatul Subh is pretty easy. You know, the alarm goes off, you see Fajr is in, you make it, you want to make it before, if you start to see that it's kind of getting light outside, then you know you're in the obligatory time, you should hurry up and pray if you haven't prayed. Dhuhr and Asr, you can kind of just use the app, right? The app is pretty legit usually. Maghrib time is pretty easy because the sunset. But the obligatory time for Asr, you're right. It is a little challenge. So one sort of, you know, crutch you can use is just to try to make sure you don't pray your Asr too close to when Maghrib comes in. If you so, and get your Asr prayed before 30 minutes before Maghrib comes in or something like that, then you know you're safe, right?
Okay.
And if you don't see the sign, you know, you just try to make sure you want to avoid praying Asr just when Maghrib, like just before Maghrib comes in. You know what I mean? Or as Maghrib is coming in. You want to avoid that.
Okay, so what's the obligatory time for Maghrib?
The obligatory time for Maghrib is just a few minutes after Maghrib comes in.
Okay. You said 3 to 6 minutes.
Yeah. I've even been with some ulama who may do 7 minutes or something like that, you know? So it's not hard and fast, but think about it as when Maghrib comes in, you should go ahead and pray.
Yes, I'm pretty much praying as quickly as I can when it goes on. But I just wanted to, if I wanted to learn fiqh, I just wanted to know the details. I'm going to pray right away, but I just wanted to know.
No, that's the way to do it. But the reason I said that for Maghrib is because a way to think about the obligatory time of Maghrib is you only have enough time to do what you need.
Your voice is cutting out.
Your
voice is still cutting out.
Something must be happening with my router. How is it now?
That's good now.
It's good. It's good. Alhamdulillah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. So I was saying with Maghrib, you have just enough time to do the things to prepare to pray. That's how you can option time for Maghrib. If you have to make the adhan, you can call the adhan. If you're in a place where people might hear you and come to pray. If you have to break your fast, you can break your fast. If you have to make wudu, you can make wudu, right? So that's how you can conceive of the obligatory time for Maghrib. It comes in once you've had enough time to do the things you need to do to prepare to pray. And then the obligatory time for Isha is when you have enough time to make one rak'ah of Isha before Fajr comes in, before Subh comes in. That's the end of the obligatory time for Isha. The beginning of the obligatory time for Isha is when 1/3 of the night has passed.
Okay. As you said earlier, this is my first go around. I'm going to have to probably do this a few more times.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Nah, it's like that. And you know, Shaykh Ameen, may Allah preserve him, is a master at like they used to say, if you ever study the life of Malcolm X, they say he used to make it plain. You know, Shaykh Ameen just breaks it down to where it's real digestible. I sometimes, you know, I'm not I'm not Shaykh Ameen. So if you hear from me and it's a little confusing, you know, just take it as a second chance to hear it so that it sinks in. And then when you talk to Shaykh Ameen, you'll be able to, it'll click a little bit faster, or you'll know exactly what questions you want to ask.
Exactly.
You know? But it'll come. And inshallah, it'll come even quicker because you're implementing it. You know, when you implement it, it helps it, you know. Like somebody just texted a question. They said, is it okay to say you can look at the sun directly for a period of time without hurting your eyes for the obligatory time of Asr? So no, and that's a great question. So you're not going to look directly at the sun to see that glow. It's when you see that there's a reflection, the sun is reflecting on the things around you, you know, in a particular kind of way. So these kind of questions are good because they're practical questions, right? Like, how do you actually look? Like the books of fiqh will say there's istirah, there's a golden glow to everything. But what does that really mean? You know, that means that around the time, maybe 30 minutes or so before Asr comes in, you can start to look, you know, at your surroundings. You'll notice, inshallah, this will happen. You won't even have to look for it. One day you're gonna be doing something, you're gonna be cooking some food or doing something around the house, and you're gonna see this like dusky glow, right? This dusky glow just coming through your window, reflecting onto the floor, reflecting onto your couch or something like that. And you're gonna say, that's the istirah. That's the glow for Asr. And then once you have that experience, now you've tasted it, so to speak. It's in you. You know, you don't have to really do any kind of calculation to figure it out. You've seen it, you witnessed it, and now it'll be with you forever. So you'll be walking down the street one day, that's the glow again, you know? And it'll just be there for you.
Shukran.
That's fine. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Do we have any closing questions, inshallah, before we wrap up for the day?
Just wanted I just wanted to let Frank know. Frank, you're not alone, brother. I've been with this for many, many years, man. Just gotta be consistent and just continuing to ask questions like you always do, because you know I always benefit from your questions, and Shaykh Ameen speaks highly of you. So alhamdulillah, you know, we're definitely learning from each other. May Allah continue to increase us.
Likewise,
Give us
I
the
benefit
ability
from
to
yours,
understand and implement what we know, or what that was teaching to us by our doctor and by Shaykh Ameen. Alhamdulillah.
Shukran.
Afwan.
Sidi Ishaq, did you have any announcements to make before we close out?
No, Imam, I don't have any announcements. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khairan for filling in today. We greatly appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And, you know, if anything I said was good and beneficial, then the praise is for Allah, and Shaykh Ameen is going to benefit too. And if I made any mistakes, that's all me. So pray that Allah forgive me. And inshallah, forgive all of us and help us all to do better. Bijay Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم أرنا حقا حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وارنا باطلا باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من الهم والحزن ونعوذ بك من العجز والكسل ونعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل ونعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. Oh Lord, we seek thy refuge from anxiety and grief. We seek thy refuge from lack of strength and laziness. We seek thy refuge from cowardliness and miserliness. And we seek thy refuge from debt and the oppression of people. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ربنا هب لنا من ازواجنا وذرياتنا قرة اعين واجعلنا للمتقين اماما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما اغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق والهادي الى صراط المستقيم وعلى اله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum, Jamaat. Please keep our teacher, Shaykh Ameen, and his family in your dua always. And please make dua for us and for the whole Jamaat as well. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We'll see you next week.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah.